Hi everyone, this is Hillary, the Nurse Preceptor. Welcome back to the Nurse Preceptor channel on YouTube. I'm glad to see you here, and if this is your first time finding me, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Today we're going to discuss where the best locations are to start an IV. And even though this video is geared more toward nurses and nursing students, you still might find this to be valuable or helpful information. Why would you start an IV? You would need to start an IV in order to administer something straight into the vein, into the circulatory system, usually IV fluids or IV medications. When you're deciding where to place an IV, you have to think about a couple of things. What do you need to administer through the IV? If you're administering something like a really irritating medication or concentrated potassium like electrolyte solutions, you would want to select a large vein because you would need to use a larger IV and have more blood flow going through the vein to help dilute the irritating substance that's going into the vein. I hope that makes sense. The smaller veins, there isn't as much blood flow coming through them, so if you administer something that's really irritating, it's going to tend to create a lot of irritation because there's not enough blood flow going through to dilute down what you're injecting. You also need to consider how long you expect the IV to be in place. Now, I came from an intensive care and emergency background, so we never knew how long people were going to be there. Sometimes people would be in the emergency room for a few hours for some IV fluids and they'd go home. Sometimes we would get people in who we knew were going to have surgery or go to intensive care, and they may even need a couple of IVs. So we would think about things that are going to be in a little bit more long term, and we would try to put a larger IV in place in an area that would be able to accommodate pretty much any kind of fluid that was administered. The other thing that's very helpful, but not always a prime consideration for nurses, is that when you're starting an IV on a patient, you have to think about the patient's comfort and the patient's ability to do things when they're hooked up to this IV. In the emergency room, we like to put a lot of the IVs right here in the antecubital fossa in one of the veins there. And we did this because it's really big veins, they're easy to access, they're easy to see, and on most people they're pretty large. As soon as your patient bends their arm, the plastic catheter that's inside the vein will pinch off just like pinching off a hose that has water running through it, and it won't allow the fluid to go through. And if it's hooked up to an IV pump, it's going to start alarming and it's going to be irritating to the patient very, very quickly. So let's talk about a few of the places where you may choose to look for veins to start an IV. A lot of the old, and I guess even some of the current nursing guides tell you to start low, which means start like as low as you can on the arm and then work your way up. I don't always subscribe to this. Personally, my hand veins are horrible, and if I see someone going for my hand vein, I beg them not to. Like, please don't do that. You're gonna really hurt me. So the veins in the hand are generally pretty easy to see. They're really superficial, but they're also very small. They are also fairly short, and there are a lot of them that connect together. And if you put your IV in and it hits one of those bifurcations, like where the vein comes together with another one, there's going to be a big valve there, and the IV won't be able to be pushed through. So I'm not a huge fan of hand veins, but in some people that's your best bet. And these are just your really superficial dorsal hand veins. From there, the next place that you would want to look is the wrist. And I find a lot of times, even on people who don't have veins that are very visible, the cephalic vein, which starts right about here in the wrist, it's a little shadowy here in the room. It's late in the day. I'm sorry. I have a really good vein that just pops right out, right about there, right over my radial bone. And a lot of people do. And if you put the tourniquet on right about here, you can get that vein to pop right up. And it tends to be big, unused for the most part, very spongy. You want a vein that's really, really plump when you kind of poke around on it. And a lot of times it's a fairly long vein, and it can accommodate a decently large IV. One other place to look that a lot of people don't think about is dorsal surface of the arm. I will say the one downfall is that if people are a bit older, and especially older men who have been outside in the sun a lot during their life, that skin tends to be really, really tough, like leather. And so sometimes you try to get the IV to go in and you have to poke so hard to go through the skin that you have a hard time getting the vein without going right through the vein, right? But there are some options right there on that side of the arm. Most people tend to go for this part of the arm, the ventral surface, which is very thin skin, generally pretty smooth. And in a lot of people, the veins are fairly easy to see because the skin's lighter colored on most people. A couple of ones you may want to look at. There is a supplementary cephalic vein that runs right along the thumb side. I'll try to put my thumb there for reference, but right along the thumb side of the arm. And then you have your median antecubital vein that runs kind of right up the middle. A lot of people, you can see that, and it looks like a blue mark going up their arm. And then you have where the cephalic vein starts right here in the wrist, it comes along and crosses over right here, just shy of your antecubital fossa, and it also continues up into the upper arm. So we have in our antecubital fossa, we have our cephalic vein, and we also have the median cephalic vein, which is usually pretty close to the center right there on a lot of people. And then a median cubital vein that goes kind of sideways. So you have a series of several veins, like kind of one on either side, one that kind of cuts through in the middle. One word of caution, you do have an artery. Your brachial artery is right under where that vein is. So if you're feeling a really strong pulsation there, you may not want to use that particular vein. There is a chance that you could accidentally cannulate the artery. That's not a good thing. I've only done that one time, and that was one too many. And then you also have your cephalic vein and your basilic veins, which run right along your upper arm. And every once in a while, if you get someone to really make a good fist and you've got a tight tourniquet on, you can see that vein just pop right up. And it may pop up, one of them may pop up right here, right between the bellies of your biceps muscle. Those are some good places to start IVs. Usually you have to start with kind of a small IV down in the hands and go a little bit bigger. By the time you reach the antecubital fossa and the upper arm, you may be able to accommodate an 18 gauge or a 16 gauge fairly well, and those are usually what you'd want to use if you had somebody who was going to need a blood transfusion or have some kind of trauma surgery. Thanks for hanging with me today, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.